Yo, grab that kid! Hey, grab the kid!
Since 1996, almost 2 million people have been deported from the U.S. They do not have access to due process. They have no idea of their destiny. Are these our American values?
By the end of 2009, the United States government will hold over 400,000 people in immigration custody. That is more than 3 times the number of immigrants that were in custody just 10 years ago. Those in custody include men, women, children, sometimes entire families, the elderly, the infirm, asylum seekers, and undocumented migrants. They are all being held in prison-like conditions, though none are being held as punishment for a crime.
This world of woe, yet there's no sickness.
Immigrants are held at approximately 400 facilities nationwide, including federally run facilities, local and county jails, and privately managed facilities. There are currently 2 detention centers in the state of Georgia: Steward Detention Center, located in Lumpkin, Georgia, and the Atlanta Pretrial Detention Center, located in downtown Atlanta. However, Immigration and Customs Enforcement is working to open a 3rd facility in Gainesville, Georgia, on the site of the old Hall County Jail. Steward Detention Center in Lumpkin, Georgia is a privately run facility managed by the Corrections Corporation of America. It has the capacity to house over 1,700 immigrant detainees and embodies many of the concerns that immigrants' rights advocates have about the use of immigration detention. Stewart was the site of a December 2008 humanitarian visit by Georgia Detention Watch, which led to a report highlighting the failure of CCA to comply with Immigration and Customs Enforcement's performance-based national detention standards. During the visit, Georgia Detention Watch members collected stories from detainees that told of inadequate access to medical care and medications, conditions that were facilitating the spread of infection, food that was inadequately cooked, expired, and unaccommodating to those with special dietary needs. Detainees told Georgia Detention Watch stories of improper use of segregation and denial of meals as punishment, verbal abuse, and failure to assist disabled inmates with their personal needs. On March 11th of 2009, Robert Martinez Medina, a detainee at Stewart Detention Center, died while in custody. According to the records of St. Francis Hospital, located in Columbus, Georgia, Mr. Medina reported to staff that he had developed a fever and a cough and suffered chest pain starting a week before his hospitalization, and that the symptoms worsened in the 3 days before he was rushed to the hospital on the afternoon of March 10, 2009. Although hospital doctors were able to quickly diagnose Mr. Medina as suffering from myocarditis, his condition rapidly deteriorated and he died the following day. To date, very little information has been provided by Corrections Corporation of America or Immigration and Customs Enforcement regarding Mr. Medina's death. Detainees often suffer under these conditions for 8 months, 13 months, even 2 years, well beyond the 6 months that the Supreme Court has deemed presumptively reasonable. Immigration detention is making a mockery of the promise. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free.
This is the Steward County Detention Center. It is a $45 million facility located 150 miles south of Atlanta. In it are imprisoned approximately 1,200 immigrants who have been swept up in raids across the United States. In late March of 2007, 1,000 of these immigrants held a 2-day hunger strike, protesting food and inadequate medical care. Word spread of the plight of these immigrants through the Consul General of Georgia and the Atlanta Latino newspaper. When I heard the news of the hunger strike, I asked myself, what would make conditions so bad that 1,000 people would go on a 2-day hunger strike? I decided to look into it, and here's what I found out.
This prison opened up just a few months ago in October. It had been under construction for a number of years. Corrections Corporation of America is the owner and operator, and CCA is one of those private corporations that is in the business of building prison facilities around this country. And so basically, while it was being constructed, CCA was brokering with various governmental entities to try to find bodies to put in this place. And finally, ICE, the immigration folks, contracted with CCA, and immigrants began arriving here in October of this past year. I understand now there are in excess of 1,200 people locked up in this prison. The warden was kind enough to give me a tour of sorts back in November, when there were only about 400 people locked up here, and when I was here I witnessed Hispanics, Mexicans, Hondurans, and some other countries. There were a few Asians and a few Haitians. A number of Haitians actually at that time were locked up here. Now I understand it's mostly Hispanics who are incarcerated here, and they're awaiting deportation. For the most part, and those hearings are occurring daily, weekly here at this facility.
That today we have a for-profit detention center, and that our government spends over $1 billion a year to detain immigrants. It's a heroic system. We see here the criminalization of what is in the law books, albeit an outdated law, and one that needs to be reformed and updated. We see the criminalization of what is a civil offense. We see here that that our government and those who are profiting from our government are deciding to use more costly options rather than less restrictive options like electronic monitoring systems. We're seeing here the building of detention centers that only serve to entice small communities in need of an economic infusion, so as to have them not realize their complicity in this whole structure that leads folks into an exodus. And we see here the continuation of the denial of access to legal counsel to detainees awaiting deportation. It is estimated that 84% of immigrants who are being detained do not have access to adequate legal counsel. And so we're seeing all of this continue. And yet we know from the Exodus story that there emerged individuals, the Moses figures, who said, "Let my people go." We are not 35 folks here. We are 1,235 folks.
Right.
And we are saying today, "Let my people go." But there's a problem. How did Moses get to use the term "my people"? I don't think that Moses used the term "my people" because he was of the same ethnicity as those enslaved. And actually, I wonder who he was talking about when he said "my people." He was both prince and Jew. He was both someone who had identified with the court and who also identified with those enslaved and those entrapped and those oppressed by a system that seeks to exploit them for economic gain. And so I say that when we can recognize that we are both those and we can live in both those worlds, that we are U.S. citizens who have gained from the exploitation of these individuals who work in our fields, who build our buildings, even government buildings, even barracks at Fort Benning, when we can recognize that we are complicit in this benefit, in this economic exploitation, but when we can also recognize that we are the ones who are imprisoned with them, that our freedom and our justice, it is intertwined with theirs, then and only then can we say with clarity, "Let my people who work here, who make their paychecks off of this, let them go. Let them live in a more just world." And to the 1,200 who are in here, who are not criminals, who are trapped in a political game, we can say, "Let my people go."
You know, we are also against illegal immigration. We decry illegal immigration. That's why we're asking for legal immigration. That's why we're asking to open doors to allow people that are working here, that are here because they are needed. We are building pyramids here. We're building pyramids, paying salaries, paying taxes, paying Social Security. I don't know if you know, but Social Security Services said that in 2005, the illegal payments to the Social Security, that means people that their Social Security card was false, was $5 billion.
Yeah.
$5 billion, that pays for quite a bit.
I guess
I'm
so.
sure none of us have it in their pockets at this moment. And yet, they are saying we don't pay. We are asking to learn English, and they send us after 16 hours of work to travel 2 hours to a place without a driver's license. You cannot drive. There is no, the people that are not from Atlanta now know that there is no public transportation in Atlanta. And to tell them, why don't you learn English there, instead of us bringing English to it. So this, I want to tell you, this is not this is not a cause. This is not causing anything. This is the result of mistakes in immigration reform, of bad feelings, bad faith, of saying we don't want them anymore because they endanger our culture, because they endanger our position here. This is the result of that. The day that we can come together with the gentleman here and open the doors, like you say, Tony, and say, people, come on out. You are no longer criminals because you happen to pass a line, a magic line that nobody can see. Because of that, come and let's walk together. I am sure that they will walk with us. They are the result of a totally failed, totally incorrect, totally inhuman system. Let's work with that. But we need to get together. We need to do it together. This is not what should have happened. We should have had an enormous amount of people, an enormous amount of Latinos. And I, as a Latino, am ashamed that we're only 2 Latinos here, maybe 3, and that we're not supporting what you are wonderfully doing. You need us to be with you, and please let us be, and please forgive that we have not come as we should have come. Thank you.
I'm with the International Action Center in Atlanta. My name's Diane Mathowitz. I also wanted to just say and note that the immigrant rights struggle in this country has electrified and moved, grassroots participation. I think all of us last year, the demonstrations in March and April, and of course May 1st, were demonstrations the size of which this country had never seen before. It brought literally millions of workers and their family members and supporters out to really shake up this situation that exists in the United States with the continual repression, not just of immigrant rights, but of all civil liberties of all of us. I don't know where, but it's likely that somebody is filming this, for a police agency. All of us who say anything, who speak up on any issue, whether it's the war, whether it's Guantanamo, whether it's police brutality, face the prospect now in this country of being under surveillance, of being watched, of having our rights denied. So that the men that are in this prison were all workers. They were working someplace here in the United States, producing goods that we consume. And they were not criminals. They were hired and they were working. They were living in houses, shopping at stores, going to church. They were living a life that they were trying to better for their families. And armed men with ICE came into their workplace, guns drawn, pepper spray, shields, the whole Darth Vader, and took them up and swept them away and brought them to locations around the country. Some of the people probably in this facility have been moved multiple times. They don't know where their families are. Their families don't know where they are. I saw the article in the newspaper. It just tore my heart into shreds about the man in this facility whose wife has also been detained and whose son died of asthma because when left behind, because his parents were arrested while they were working, he then went to relatives who were not aware of his medical condition and he died. This is such a crime, and it is good that all of us are standing here to indict the criminals and that this has got to stop. In 2 weeks or so, May Day around the country, again, there will be massive demonstrations in towns large and small, largely focused around this issue of stop the raids and deportations. That this kind of repressive action by police agencies is striking fear not just in those that don't have documents, but in anybody who speaks with an accent or who a police person thinks doesn't belong here can be swept up. And if they don't have their ID with them, can face a prospect of having to go through police agency after police agency just to identify who they are. So from the International Action Center, we offer our great appreciation to the 2 organizations that called this demonstration. We had read about this instance and we were hoping, so much hoping, that there would be a response. And we thank all of you who are here. We look forward very much to working with you in the future.
Out of those human rights we've talked about this week, were there any activities for those rights that were particularly interesting to you?
I did like today when we went to the detention center to visit the men there, and it was very interesting to talk to them and listen to their stories and what it was like for them there and what their life was before and what they're going to go home to.
So what kind of detention center? Can you describe the field trip a little bit?
There was more security than I thought there was. Lots of barbed wire around the whole building and gates that had to be opened by a button and taking off everything when you went in. Your shoes, your keys, your phone all had to be scanned. And then when you went in, there were gates inside that the guards had to open, and the phones that we had to use were to talk to the men were not very well. You couldn't really hear them that well, and it was smaller than I thought it would be, and not as many families as I expected, even though the building was pretty big. Yeah, and the men there were very nice. I thought they would be a little meaner, I guess, or angry for being in a place like that, but they were very kind to us.
Those of you who aren't from Southwest Georgia can get an idea of how remote this place is, how remote Lumpkin, Georgia is, and how rural it is, and how cut off someone could be who's locked up in a prison this far away from other parts of the country, even this far away from Atlanta. And that's one of the real issues here is that we have 1,200 to 1,500 people. This place is built to hold over 1,500 people who are isolated all the more from the help and love and care they may need. Their families are far away. Their lawyers, if they have lawyers, are far away, and it's virtually impossible to have any kind of regular contact with folks who are here for however short or long period of time they might be locked up here. So we're the Prison and Jail Project, which monitors all sorts of prisons and jails in Southwest Georgia, is particularly concerned about this place because of its isolation and because of the fact that folks who are locked up here are cut off so drastically from the outside world. So that's why we're here, is to one, to be in solidarity with one another and with the folks behind these walls, but also to begin what we hope at the Prison and Jail Project will be a process where we can begin to come together. The organizations we're here representing in Georgia and from other parts of the country, that we can begin to have some real good dialogue to create ways that we can open up these gates to folks who need assistance, whether it's legal assistance, whether it's help with their families getting to and from a place like this, translating for those folks, introducing them to Southwest Georgia so they don't get ripped off when they come down here looking for places to stay or eat. So we hope that this can be a starting point for that kind of dialogue.
I was not aware of this situation, but I am now. And what I enjoy about the work that I do more than anything else is that when we make up our mind as a single lawyer, single individual, that we're going to deal with the situation, then it's in our power to do that. And so I hope that it's some comfort to you to know that we'll be opening a file on Monday morning on this jail, and that we'll conduct an investigation on this jail. And John and I will get together if litigation is what's necessary. Judge Land at the Federal District Court there knows me. He knows that I have brought issues to him before, and it looked like we need to take this issue to Judge Land immediately also. So John, you and I will get together and we'll go ahead and look into the conditions that's pending at this particular site also. What you do here, even though it's a small number, the intent was to send the message out that there's a problem here. and I'm on the Trial Lawyers Immigration Association board. We stand 10,000 lawyers strong around this nation to deal with immigration issues. And so I'll report to them that I was here with you guys on today and that we need some help down here in terms of dealing with this particular problem. Okay? So I hope it comforts you to know that we will be focusing on this and we will be dealing with this situation. Okay? And I'll let them know today when I go in that you were out here and that you're concerned about them. And I'm going to tell them to hold on because help is coming. It's
on the way.
That before you leave here, I think at some moment you need to let it sink in that there are literally 1,200 people behind this fence and wall of fear and shame. We need to remember that there are fathers, that there are grandfathers, that there are people who have mental health issues, who have physical health concerns, that there are real people whose very families, both here in the United States and in Latin America, are literally suffering emotionally and economically because we say, come in through our deserts, through our dangerous places, we won't have this much security there, but we'll put up these symbolic raids to instill within the undocumented community a high level of fear so that they'll stay in the margins and in the shadows. And so let's just remember that there are Jesuses, that there are Josés, Ricardos, Gustavos, Guillermos, Carlos inside this, what the CCA director said, it's not a prison, it's a detention center. It is neither. It is a tool of manipulation and fear. These are not detainees. These are not prisoners. These are human beings, some of the poorest in our hemisphere.
My trip to the Steward County Detention Center left me with a number of questions. I hope you'll have questions too, and I hope you'll try to find out the answers.
In terms of the people who are in there, the names of the people and the ages of the people, does the public have a right to have that information? I just don't understand the level of secrecy and why we don't know who's in there. What's the age range of the people in there? I know all the women have been moved to another facility.
The women
How about
have been moved
the children?
to North Alabama to Etowah County, which has its own issues, and that's a county jail that DHS buys beds from. I don't know at the age. I mean, any factual information we would welcome. We know that minors migrate to the United States alone. I don't know what they do with minors who are raided, who don't have family members here. There was a 15-year-old just in Columbus who was killed without his family being here, as they are victimized and targets of individuals who they can't trust the institutional systems. They don't have access to the financial institutions, and so many times they are victims of violent crimes.
Let's work together and do something.
You got a place at the welcome table. You got a place at the welcome table one of these days. Hallelujah. You got a place at the welcome table. Place at the welcome table one of these days. We'll sit together. We'll sit together at the welcome table. We'll sit together at the welcome table one of these days. Hallelujah. We'll sit together at the welcome table. Sit at the welcome table one of these days.
My name is June Everett, and my sister is Sandra Marina Kinley. To find out after reading the papers recently that more than 62 immigrants have died and continue to die while in U.S. custody since about the time of my sister's death is shocking.
It is my privilege to appear before you to discuss the medical care of immigration detainees. DRO's core mission is the apprehension, detention, and removal of deportable aliens. In carrying out our mission, one of our highest priorities is to provide the best possible health care to those in our custody.
We told the ICE officer of my sister's medical condition. She had high blood pressure and high cholesterol. She had a bleeding fibroid. Despite all this, ICE determined that she needed to be detained.
ICE healthcare policy requires that all detainees receive an initial health screening upon arrival at a detention facility. In emergencies, medical staff or 911 are called immediately.
I have so many questions about Sandy's death, and ICE has made it so very difficult for me to learn what happened.
In the past 4 years, approximately 1 million people have passed through our custody. Unfortunately, 66 have died. We are always saddened by the death of a detainee.
I cannot tell you the stories of all these other deceased immigrants, but I can tell you my sister's story. She died because the American system failed her. A system that needs fixing now. My sister was the type of person that, wouldn't hurt anyone, always want to be there for you, look out for you, and help you in any way that she could. Growing up in Barbados, she was the eldest of 4 kids. She did everything for us when my mom wasn't there. She was big sis. We always dreamed of coming here, so when we got that opportunity, we jumped on it. She's been here 33 years. I've been here 30. So, it's a big part that's lost now. Sandra, at one point, was misusing drugs. After she was arrested, she changed her whole life around. I was very proud of it. She became a nurse, and she had full custody of her grandbaby. So she went back home to show how well she was doing. After going to Barbados and returning here through Miami Airport, my sister was detained there for some misdemeanor charges from years before, which she never went to jail for, and she was released from probation early. So here's a 52-year-old grandmother that has just changed her life and turned her life around to do positive things now, being incarcerated through ICE, the ICE officers at Dallas Airport. My sister, Sandra Marina Kinley, was not a terrorist. My sister, Sandra Marina Kinley, was a permanent resident, not to be captured and to be prosecuted and persecuted where they have no medical treatment, no legal assistance, no nothing to go on. On December 18, 2005, I got a call. I was figuring it's my sister good, she's calling me now. But then when I heard the voice of this lady, a strange voice, something went through my heart. So when she told me my sister had died, I couldn't believe it. Now I'm getting information now recently where I see she was fighting for her life. She was writing to them. She was begging them to give her pills, the correct pills. And the pills that they gave her when they did give her were the wrong ones. The cellmate stated that she knocked on the cell door for 20 minutes before anyone would come. But still on the autopsy report, there's nothing about head injuries. You know, they're just saying that she died from a heart attack as a result of her high blood pressure. In the hospital report, they said it took over 50 minutes before the emergency service got there. And, you know, I would really like to find out how my sister really died. And I would like to find out what really happened. The American system here for these detainees need to be fixed right away. This is very urgent. These are lives that we're talking about, human beings.
This is the Steward County Detention Center. It is a $45 million facility located 150 miles south of Atlanta. In it are imprisoned approximately 1,200 immigrants who have been swept up in raids across the United States. In late March of 2007, 1,000 of these immigrants held a 2-day hunger strike, protesting food and inadequate medical care. Word spread of the plight of these immigrants through the Consul General of Georgia and the Atlanta Latino newspaper. When I heard the news of the hunger strike, I asked myself, what would make conditions so bad that 1,000 people would go on a 2-day hunger strike? I decided to look into it, and here's what I found out.
This prison opened up just a few months ago in October. It had been under construction for a number of years. Corrections Corporation of America is the owner and operator, and CCA is one of those private corporations that is in the business of building prison facilities around this country. And so basically, while it was being constructed, CCA was brokering with various governmental entities to try to find bodies to put in this place. And finally, ICE, the immigration folks, contracted with CCA, and immigrants began arriving here in October of this past year. I understand now there are in excess of 1,200 people locked up in this prison. Those of you who aren't from Southwest Georgia can get an idea of how remote this place is, how remote Lumpkin, Georgia is, and how rural it is, and how cut off someone could be who's locked up in a prison this far away from other parts of the country, even this far away from Atlanta. And that's one of the real issues here.
We're seeing here the building of detention centers that only serve to entice small communities in need of an economic infusion so as to have them not realize their complicity in this whole structure that leads folks into an exodus. And we see here the continuation of the denial of access to legal counsel to detainees awaiting deportation. It is estimated that 84% of immigrants who are being detained do not have access to adequate legal counsel. And so I say that when we can recognize that we are U.S. citizens who have gained from the exploitation of these individuals who work in our fields, who build our buildings, even government buildings, even barracks at Fort Benning, when we can recognize that we are complicit in this benefit, in this economic exploitation, but when we can also recognize that we are the ones who are imprisoned with them, that our freedom and our justice, it is intertwined with theirs, then and only then can we say with clarity, let my people who work here, who make their paychecks off of this, let them go. Let them live in a more just world. And to the 1,200 who are in here, who are not criminals, who are trapped in a political game, we can say, let my people go.
You know, we are also against illegal immigration. We decry illegal immigration. That's why we're asking for legal immigration. That's why we're asking to open doors to allow people that are working here, that are here because they are needed. We are building pyramids here. We're building pyramids, paying salaries, paying taxes, paying Social Security. This is not a cause. This is not causing anything. This is the result of mistakes in immigration reform, of bad feelings, bad faith, of saying we don't want them anymore because they endanger our culture, because they endanger our position here. This is the result of that.
I'm with the International Action Center in Atlanta. My name's Diane Mathowitz. The men that are in this prison were all workers. They were working someplace here in the United States, producing goods that we consume. And they were not criminals. They were hired and they were working. They were living in houses, shopping at stores, you know, going to church. They were living a life that they were trying to better for their families. And armed men with ICE came into their workplace, guns drawn, pepper spray, shields, the whole Darth Vader, and took them up and swept them away and brought them to locations around the country. Some of the people probably in this facility have been moved multiple times. They don't know where their families are. Their families don't know where they are. This is such a crime, and it is good that all of us are standing here to indict the criminals.
And so I hope that it is some comfort to you to know that we'll be opening a file on Monday morning on this jail, and that we'll conduct an investigation on this. What you do here, even though it's a small number, the intent was to send the message out that there's a problem here. And I'll let them know today when I go in that you were out here and that you're concerned about them. And I'm going to tell them to hold on because help is coming.
It's on the way.
Before you leave here, I think at some moment you need to let it sink in that there are literally 1,200 people behind this fence and wall of fear and shame. We need to remember that there are fathers, that there are grandfathers, that there are people who have mental health issues, who have physical health concerns, that there are real people whose very families, both here in the United States and in Latin America, are literally suffering emotionally and economically because we say, come in through our deserts, through our dangerous places, we won't have this much security there, but we'll put up these symbolic raids to instill within the undocumented community a high level of fear so that they'll stay in the margins and in the shadows. And so let's just remember that there are Jesuses, that there are Josés, Ricardos, Gustavos, Guillermos, Carlos inside this, what the CCA director said, it's not a prison, it's a detention center. It is neither. It is a tool of manipulation and fear. These are not detainees, these are not prisoners, these are human beings, some of the poorest in our hemisphere. You got a place at the welcome table. You got a place at the welcome table one of these days. Hallelujah. You got got a place at the welcome table. Place at the welcome table one of these days. We'll sit together. We'll sit together at the welcome table. We'll sit together at the welcome table one of these days. Hallelujah. We'll sit together at the welcome table. Sit at the welcome table one of these days. You got a place at the welcome table. You got a place at the welcome table one of these days. Hallelujah. You got a place at the welcome table. Place at the welcome table one of these days. We'll sit together. We'll sit together at the welcome table. We'll sit together at the welcome table one of these days. Hallelujah. We'll sit together at the welcome table. Sit at the welcome table one of these days.
Whenever you go all the way to the detention center and you see it's just, I just cannot imagine my husband in
there. The mandate is a disaster. I mean, you don't see that in any other law enforcement context where legislative bodies basically forcing law enforcement to detain a certain number of people.
You have to put the numbers in context. So only 1.7% of ICE's caseload is in the detention center. So it's a very select group of people.
Most detention facilities are in very remote areas, and families have to travel very long distances to be able to visit. And then most of them, of course, are in financial crisis, or at least in some sort of financial distress, because one of the breadwinners, and usually the primary breadwinner, is detained. They no longer have that income.
I mean, I know it's a jail, I know it's a prison, but I never thought that they would treat them like criminals. There's big, huge balls of razor wire and double fences, just like they were somebody that had murdered somebody or something, you know. It hurts me to see that my husband's lost so much weight. The first time I saw him, I was just, he said the look on your face was like the worst thing you ever seen in your life. And I said, no, I didn't mean it that way. It was just how much you had changed. How much you had changed and how much different you look.
We've worked with so many families that have decided not to bring their children to visit their fathers, even though they know it will be the last time that their children will be able to see their fathers for many years. And the reason for that is that, again, their fathers are treated, they're wearing the jumpsuits, they're behind glass, there's the telephone, and the parents tell us that they just don't want their last memory to be this memory.
The numbers of people detained have in the past decade gone up tremendously for no good reason. And so, we need to look at who's making money off of the detention of immigrants. Why are we detaining 34,000 people where a lot of them could be out living with their communities and not posing this type of enormous cost to taxpayers.
They provide jobs, they provide opportunities in some of those counties where past agricultural and some of the jobs that have left those areas has filled the gap.
Still in Irwin County, there's a population of less than 10,000 people, and at current, there's almost 200 employees out there. The largest private employer inside of the city of Osceola or in Irwin County.
Chicken tender pie double fried.
I feed a lot of people from all over the county and surrounding counties that come back into the work. And then they come here and eat all the time, probably $400, $500, $600 worth of business a week, just for my little business. We need it, and it's been a plus for Irwin County.
ICE is forced to detain 34,000 people a year. They are going to basically employ all sorts of mechanisms to ensure that they can get 34,000 people detained and deported, regardless of whether they actually need to be detained.
If you want to see less people in detention, decrease illegal immigration. You want to get rid of detention centers, secure the borders, use E-Verify so you don't lure as many people in here for jobs, and enforce the laws.
And the result of everything is that he's going to be deported. I have 4 kids that I see crying every day. We don't have no other choice. He's going to have to go. It's a really, really big impact on them.
But here in the United States, some 34,000 undocumented immigrants are being held in detention centers. Many have fled violence in Central America and have family here, but they still face deportation.
VOA's Jerome Sokolovsky went to one of the country's largest detention centers where critics who want to see it closed are trying to help the detainees inside. Take a look.
Volunteer Beatriz Henao tries to lift the spirits of a Salvadoran detainee, telling him God never arrives late. Nilson Flores was caught at the border in May and brought to the Steward Detention Center in Georgia, a facility for male detainees. Most of them are sent back to their countries despite conditions there.
They should call this place the jail of broken dreams.
Henao is a volunteer with El Refugio, the refuge in Spanish. The faith-based group works out of a house down the road in Lumpkin, Georgia.
Now, you were able to accompany volunteers to this center. What stands out to you about the time you spent with them there?
I think the motivation of these people to actually have a contact with the detainees was quite striking. From a moral and a religious perspective, they feel that they have to show hospitality to these strangers in their country. One of them told me, I almost feel like I have to go and say, I do not agree with this. I'm not part of this. I want to help you and do, what little I can.
I want to talk more about this for-profit aspect of the system. People who support that, why do they say that that's a good way to set up the system?
Right, well, the federal government says that this is a more tax-effective way of detaining these people, and that it gives them the flexibility to move people around. However, the opponents say that what ends up happening is that there's a profit incentive.
When your profit margin is dependent upon apprehending and incarcerating, and when you make more profit by cutting costs in their care, I feel that that's reprehensible.
The estimates I saw is that it costs about $150 a day to keep these people in detention. There are lots of hotels that I stay at when I'm traveling that don't cost that much.
It's interesting, Jerome, we don't often get a look inside these detention centers. How was it that you were able to go in and do this story?
I was a bit surprised that I was allowed in. Also, the people at El Refugio told me that it was very unusual for a reporter with a camera to be allowed in. I think one of the interesting things is I was promised an interview with this detainee one-on-one. But when I was there, I was told, oh, for us to arrange that, we have to shut down the whole family visit system. I was accredited to go to this center, and that, the arrangements should have been made. There should have been a separate room for an interview with this guy. I'm not unhappy with the way it turned out, because in a way, I think it's very realistic to see through the window. But doing TV, it makes it more difficult to tell his story, because you need shots of him doing other things to be able to talk about him. So
let's talk more about him and his story. What drove him to come to the U.S.?
I think it's a very interesting and moving and tragic story. His family left or fled El Salvador during the Civil War in the, I think around 1990. And he was a baby then, so he was left behind with relatives. Now there's another wave of violence in the country, and he's trying to leave and rejoin his parents, who he hasn't seen for 24 years. He's 25 years old. So he made the perilous journey through Mexico, and was abandoned in the desert by a coyote, by a human smuggler. He said at one point, I was so exhausted, I just turned myself into the authorities.
What do you hope people who watch your piece take away from it?
I think the way this issue has been portrayed in this country has been pretty one-sided against these immigrants. So I didn't think it was such a bad thing to give the people who feel empathy with them more of a voice. I think this is a voice we don't hear so much in the debate in the U.S.
That debate should pick up again after the U.S. congressional elections in November. President Obama has said that is when he'll consider taking executive action on immigration.
No immigration police, no sheriff, no fear. The world we want is right here. A little bit louder. I see. No immigration police, no sheriff, no fear. The world we want is right here. Like you mean it. I see. No immigration police, no sheriff, no fear. The world we want is right here. One more time. I see. No immigration police, no sheriff, no fear. The world we want is right here. Give a round of applause to yourselves.
I know it, and there'll be more. And I lift way up. When you see a photo of it, it's like
my parents came here without insurance and have been living in the shadows for over 30 years, although they pay their taxes. Let's not forget that those 1,800 men were being warehoused for profit behind the Steward. Wait, the beauty of the bomb. We discovered this ruin.
Oh, in my face again!
Oh. I know it, and there'll be more. And I lift way up. When you see a photo of it, it's like
Anton, who is the man with the microphone there.
Uh-huh.
I want to let you know, last year we had a record-breaking attendance of 300 individuals. Last year there were 300 individuals, and that was the record. That was our 7th year, and this, our 8th year, the number is 1,000. In a town of 1,300, we've got 1,000 people here. Say, shut down, Steward! Shut down, Steward! Shut down, Steward! Shut down!
What democracy looks like! This is what democracy looks like! Show me what democracy looks like! This is what democracy looks like! Show me what democracy looks like! This is what democracy looks like! Show me what democracy looks like! This is what democracy looks like! Show me what democracy looks like! This is what democracy looks like! Show me what democracy looks like!
I see, no immigration police, no sheriff, no fear. The world we want is right here. Sing that. I see, no immigration police, no sheriff, no fear. The world we want is right here. A little bit louder. I see, no immigration police, no sheriff, no fear. The world we want is right here. Like you mean it. I see, no immigration police, no sheriff, no fear. The world we want is right here. One more time. I see, no immigration police, no sheriff, no fear. The world we want is right here. Give a round of applause to yourselves.
Today is from Mark, my favorite gospel. It's the first chapter, verses 14 to 20. Now after John was arrested, Jesus came to Galilee, proclaiming the good news of God, and saying, the time is fulfilled, and the kingdom of God has come near. Repent and believe in the good news. As Jesus passed along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, follow me, and I will make you fish for people. And immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went a little farther, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, who were in the boat mending their nets. Immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. Thanks be to God.
Have you ever had an experience that just discombobulated you? You don't really know what to do with it. It was just, you didn't know what you expected, but it wasn't really what you expected. Well, that's what visiting Steward Detention Center was for me, and I'm still not sure what to do with it. But I do feel a strong need to tell others about what I saw, to bear witness. And the words of Martin Luther King Jr. in Birmingham jail come to mind. Injustice everywhere is a threat to justice. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And in the few minutes that I have, I just hope to set the scene for the individual stories you will hear. You know obviously where we went. You may or may not know that Steward Detention Center has been referred to as the black hole of the immigration system in America. It's located in Lumpkin, Georgia, close to the Alabama line. It's the largest immigration detention center in the U.S. And as Jane said, houses 2,000 men. It has the highest deportation rate, 98%. And only 6% of its detainees ever see an attorney, which is less than half the national rate. And one reason for this is all by design, of course, that Lumpkin is at the back of beyond. The remote rural location makes it difficult for even the most committed civil rights attorneys to take on clients at Steward. It's a for-profit facility run by Core Civic, a company formerly known as Corrections Corporation of America, clever rebranding. Fort Benning is 36 miles away, and incidentally is also home to the Western Hemisphere Institute for Security Cooperation, formerly known as the U.S. Army School of the Americas. We arrived at Koinonia Farm after dark, so we really had not had a chance to see the countryside too much. And after an early breakfast, we left on the 45-minute drive from Koinonia to Lumpkin, driving along flat, narrow, rural roads stretching between cotton fields hacked out of the red clay. We knew we had arrived in Lumpkin by the closed-up storefronts, the rusted-out gas stations, and the gun store advertising guns for Christians. The turn into the detention center was marked by a small, obscure sign, and the center itself was not visible from the main road. And I was going to tell the same thing Jane told, which I don't want to repeat, but it's almost, maybe it's worth repeating because it was it clearly made the same impact on you that it did on me, but after there's a tall fence topped with barbed wire around the complex, and then you ring a buzzer, and you walk through the first of two sequential metal gates, and you wait for the first one to slowly clang behind you, and then the next one, a second buzzer, the next one swings open slowly. So you have to remind yourself that this is a detention center and not a prison. The waiting room on a Friday morning was not full. There was a middle-aged Latina bouncing a smiling baby girl on her lap. And later, another family group walked in, which included a young Latina, 2 elementary-aged children, and an older man. And we proceeded to sign in, completing paperwork to visit the detainees whose names had been given us by El Refugio. And on the paperwork, we each filled out our detainees' identifying 8-digit A number, A for alien, as well as a question about our own citizenship. And this would clearly be a deterrent to undocumented family members who might want to visit anyone there. And then we proceeded to wait, and wait, and wait. I waited for 4 hours. Some in our group waited longer. There are 5 visitation cubicles for 2,000 men. The woman behind the desk was happy to exercise the power she had over this group of visitors, who were obviously not local. No food or drink were allowed. We'll let BJ tell you about that. There were no toys. Can you imagine trying to entertain children for hours with nothing? Bathroom and water fountain requests were denied initially. We're too busy, although there wasn't a lot going on. Or delayed. We did eventually get to go to the bathroom, escorted. When I asked for paper to take notes, we had initially been told that we were not allowed to take notes, I was given a slip of paper the size of a library card. And the only real thing that happened during all this time was the changing of the shift of the guards. So we did get to watch the guards file in, holding lunch bags. They had to feed everything through the metal detectors, and we're observing all this. So that really was pretty much all that happened. Once called in, we were escorted single file to the visitation room, and as Nancy told the children, the conversations in cubicles through plexiglass on a telephone, and the detainees wear jumpsuits, and they are identified by their number. It really does feel like a concentration camp. I'm not going to tell you the story of my detainee. You will hear the stories of others, but I will leave you with a word picture of the family who was leaving the booth next to my detainee as I entered. And I couldn't see the person on the other side of the glass, but I could see the family gathering in the little cubicle on this side, and the mother was crying. And the 3 children, one by one, were going up to the glass to say their goodbyes to, I assumed, was their father. And each made a heart sign with their fingers as they turned to leave.
As I waited with others in the visiting area across the room from the booths, I guess we call them cubicles here tonight, where I would visit with Joseph from Ghana, I had several thoughts going through my mind. First was confession. This was the first time since I was 21 years old that I had visited anyone in prison. And I thought, what a shame. I also thought, what am I going to offer Joseph? I had absolutely no idea what I had come here to offer him. I also thought about our long day of waiting, which included delays for shift changes, and delays for, did they call them body counts or did they call them detainee counts? Body counts, but continual delays. There were disappointments. Some of us were assigned detainees that for one reason or another did not want a visitor on that day. So we had to register to visit one person and then have our person changed. I also thought about that one of our members actually disappeared from us for about 2 or 3 hours, and we were very worried about what had happened to him. But he showed up. And then all of a sudden, Joseph appeared behind the glass, holding his ID up, which was hung around his neck, sort of to the glass. So this is the first picture I got of him. I would soon discover that Joseph was a 39-year-old school teacher with a wife and 2 children back in Ghana. His bright eyes stood out in the poorly lit visiting area on the other side of the glass. We picked up our phones and introduced ourselves. Joseph responded to my questions with his story of persecution rooted in his determination to remain true to his faith. Great surprise to me that that's who I was visiting. Joseph was a Presbyterian. He was a very active member of his church. But he was also the son of a chief who was the leader of an indigenous African traditional religious community. His father had died suddenly, and his uncle was next in line to be the chief and to lead the practice of the indigenous community. His uncle was also a Christian. And when he refused to take up the leadership of another faith community. He was killed. This left Joseph, the eldest son, the next in line to assume the role of leader of the traditional African religious community. Like many young men faced with this choice, Joseph chose to leave Ghana and remain true to his faith. His journey began with a boat to Brazil, where he sought asylum. But like others from Ghana, he was denied. He then began a long journey through South and Central America and into Mexico, and then presented himself at the border seeking political asylum, or in this case actually religious asylum, persecution in Ghana. He explained that neither the government of Ghana nor the human rights groups in Ghana would enter into the conflict between traditional African religion and Christians. So there was no help there. Since visiting with Joseph, I have done some reading and found that a number of Christians in Ghana have sought asylum in other countries for the very same reasons. And several who were then deported back to Ghana had been killed. Joseph was taken into custody at the border. He ended up detained at Steward, where he had spent now 18 months. I asked him if he had friends or family in the United States, and he said he had a friend named Eric who lived in Columbus, Ohio, but he had lost touch with him, and I offered to call Eric for him and had tried, and the number is now disconnected. Joseph did not have an attorney to represent his right to political asylum. Last July, the immigration court at Steward rejected his asylum case. And since then, Joseph has agreed to voluntary departure, knowing that it could very well mean that he will be killed upon returning to Ghana. He said God was his only protection now. And then he told me that his high school history teacher had told him that the United States was like heaven. And he believed it. And so he assumed that he could come to this country and be supported. And now he found himself imprisoned in the U.S. for standing by his faith. In a somber tone, he asked me, what happened to heaven? I apologized for my country's refusal to welcome him, but reported to him that there were thousands of people trying to change this country's hostility toward immigrants and refugees. I told him that I admired his willingness to go through all of this because of his faith. And he looked at me a little puzzled, and he said, people just don't understand what it's like to go to prison for your faith. I agreed with him that most people did not, but then told him that there were people in this country who were willing to go to jail for practicing their faith, and that I had once spent a month in jail for refusing to pay taxes for war based on my pacifist faith. His eyes brightened, again like they were at first, and he placed his hand on the glass between us. and I raised my hand and placed it against his on the glass. We said our goodbyes, and there were tears on both sides of the glass. And then I got up from my chair and turned away from him. And then I decided to turn back once more. And there he was with his thumb up like this. And I went back to the glass and placed my thumb against his. And Joseph smiled.
Delfino didn't know until he was 19 years old that he was illegal. He had other things to worry about, especially a frequently absent father and a regularly abusive mother. They had brought him here from Mexico when he was 3 years old. He was shocked when he found out that for all those years of his growing up, he wasn't a U.S. citizen. He's made some mistakes in his life. He admitted that to me right off as we gazed each other through that thick piece of glass, talking on the prison phones. It's just that he's been thrown into an unmerciful and unforgiving system. And his mistakes have cost him a lot more than ours generally cost us. I tried to encourage him to be forgiving toward himself, to remember that he is a beloved child of God, whose grace is abundant. But I knew it was a hard sell. Delfino has a namesake 10-year-old son who he calls Fino. He, in fact, spent most of our visit talking about him. Before Delfino was picked up and taken to the Steward Detention Center, he had a talk with Fino. He looked his young son in the eyes, and he said, "I want you to know that I will always love you. If I can't be with you, it's not because I don't love you. I want to be with you more than anything in the world. And I want you to remember that I will always love you no matter what." His voice cracked as he told me. Delfino is worried about his son's safety. He fears that his ex-wife is abusing him, as he himself felt abused by her. She used to let Delfino call and talk to his son every week, but now she has blocked his calls. He assumes that she would destroy any letters that he would send before they ever got to his son, so he doesn't bother to write. It breaks Delfino's heart. Since his detainment, he's had 3 lawyers, or more accurately, 3 predators masquerading as lawyers, who took thousands of dollars of his money and did nothing for him. There are throngs of people out there waiting to prey on the vulnerability of desperate immigrants. Now, lacking other resources or options, Delfino plans to represent himself at his court hearing next month, hoping to convince the judge that his son needs him for protection. But he knows what he's up against. He knows that there's virtually no chance that he will not be among the 98% of Steward detainees who get deported, the highest rate in the country. He's not officially a dreamer. No one told him about DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, the Obama-era policy that provides protection from deportation for those who were brought here illegally by their parents when they were young children. Didn't hear about it until he was too old to qualify. But except for his official status, he shares everything in common with the 800,000 young immigrants who are currently being used as political pawns by the President and the Republicans in Congress. He holds his breath with them as they await their fate, their future in the hands of a government that has been vocal about its antipathy and disdain. Delfino does not remember Mexico. He does not know anyone there. What he does know is that the country suffers for lack of jobs and opportunity, and that despair, violence, and corruption have erupted in response. I'm determined to make the best of it, he says. Looking down, he adds, but it's going to be hard. I ask him, apart from being separated from Fino, what will be the hardest thing? He looks up, shakes his head, and says, I guess I'm going to have to learn Spanish.
Saturday, January the 6th was Epiphany. Epiphany. Manifestation of Jesus to the wise men. Extended to Gentiles. And that today includes me. Epiphany this year was the manifestation of Jesus in people to me. Beginning on January 4th, when Jim and Ann picked me up and took me to the Walker Wilson's home, the trip began. Greg's driving was magnificent for hours, especially when we had a power blowout on the way home. I wasn't scared of it. Thanks, Greg. Suzanne's meals were awesome. One way to my heart is good food, and I cannot begin to fathom how she pulled it off. Casseroles, soups, snacks, all homemade from scratch. Together, Greg's and Suzanne's planning of our trip was a magical MEIGS journey, nothing short of a miracle for me. Koinonia was not new to me. Jack loved reading those cotton patch versions of Scripture when he preached, and I had visited there before. Friday morning, after a good night's sleep at Koinonia, we headed to El Refugio in Lumpkin. It's a tiny house that sleeps 9 family members who come from afar to visit their family member detainees on Saturdays and Sundays. The director, Amilcar Valencia, accompanied us to the Steward Detention Center and sat with us as we waited and waited and waited our turn to visit. I had fun watching Suzanne play with a little tiny girl, baby. And anyway, after about 6 hours, I began to feel faint and diabetes. And we hadn't had anything to eat and couldn't bring anything to eat. And it just dawned on me, I didn't know what was going to happen. And gentle Amilcar took my arm and took me out of that place and drove me back to El Refugio and fed me Suzanne's polenta, which just like that brought me back. to reality. And then he returned me to Steward, and I was able to visit with Duke Sherpa, a 30-year-old Nepalese who'd been there 2 years. Looking into his soft Buddhist eyes and his attentive, smiling face through that plexiglass window, and hearing his calm voice over the telephone have become imprinted in my heart. Truly a manifestation of Jesus for me. After supper, finally, when we were back at Koinonia, we heard from the leaders at Koinonia, Brenda Bay and Elizabeth Deedy, who was a friend from the Open Door that I knew, and Stuart Kraut, mainly from Brenda Bay. And I won't go into all of that, but I did want to tell you that part of Koinonia's work is providing backpacks filled with shirts, here it is, shoes, socks, underwear, pants, a coat or jacket for these detainees if they are deported. Because otherwise, all they have is their uniform from the detention, what I call prison. This is their catalog, the Koinonia catalog, and we can donate $75, which will pay for one of those backpacks or a detainee. Just thought I'd let you know about that. Saturday morning, Epiphany Day, we piled back into the bus and headed to LaGrange to visit with Anton and Charlotte. Anton Flores is just a miracle person to me. He is brilliant, and he is so sacrificial in giving all of his income practically to immigrants, Latino, for them to get a mortgage-free home. And now he is in a cul-de-sac where we visited that day, and the little children, since it was Epiphany, he had gotten a piñata for them to break. And the little children were singing a song in Spanish as the one child with a stick tried to break piñata. It was interesting, the little girl broke it. And then they all got the candy, and we all were invited into that nearest home for king cake, and Nancy brought that here too. One like it. Finally, we headed back to Asheville, and thankfully, Ann and Jim brought me safely home to my house, because I don't think I could have driven it all after that. That entire trip was like a life-changing soul experience for me. My Circle of Mercy sojourners, Nancy, Suzanne, Greg, Caleb, Jane, Ann, Jim, Bill, and Joyce are all epiphanies or manifestations of Jesus for me.